And one night I was working, I got done working, I went upstairs, and God was like, as clear as day, by this time next year, I need you to leave this job. And I was okay with it because I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to do all of that. So I started putting plans in place to figure out what this next thing was. The job wasn't going so great. I wasn't reporting to the best person. So I was like, listen, I'm ready to do it. About a month before that time, I met with the GM to kind of tell him, where my head was and all of that. And he was like, listen, there are about to be some changes. I need you to trust me. I just need you to stay. And so for me, that right there was my Abraham and Isaac, which is my favorite story in the Bible.
Okay.
But I had a mentor that told me, it's great that you heard what God said, but it's more important for you to hear what God is saying. Because I heard what God said and I was ready to go. Like, he could have told me anything from then on out, I wouldn't have heard him because I heard what I needed to hear.
Right.
And if Abraham wouldn't have continued to listen, he would have slayed Isaac. So that's one of the reasons I love that story. But there's
that's so good. I mean, I'm
talk
like,
about,
wow, that's really good.
We could talk about 12 different podcasts about, I think, those 22 scriptures.
So true.
But at any rate, I stayed on, started reporting to somebody else. That's when I got all of my podcast experience, which has been instrumental in this transition. And part of the reason I podcast is just to be a conduit for other people's voices, to amplify people's voices and let their voice be heard, send other people's voices to the nations. So left that job because I just couldn't deal with the corporate bureaucracy. I felt like there was a lot of racism going on. There was nobody that looked like me above a management position. I had been there 9 years. I felt like I was getting overlooked and all of that. And I wasn't going to do it anymore. The guy that I was reporting to, he was silencing me. And that's when I started growing my hair out because I didn't have a voice. So I started expressing myself
through
my hair. Like if I've got to send you one of my wedding pictures. I was clean cut. I was a corporate guy.
I could imagine that.
Listen, told the company line, all of that. But I was like, you know what? They don't appreciate that. I was wearing a mask, unfortunately.
Yep.
And 10 years later, 10 years prior, I'm jumping around, but be patient with me. 10 years prior, I was 25 years old. And I've got this brain doctor that I do some stuff with. He said the male brain, or actually human brain, isn't fully developed until around 25 to 28 years old. So when you talk about the promiscuity or our behaviors when we're 18, 19, 21, we're not even operating with a full deck.
So right. You're so true.
But we're being judged. And just to add something about judgment, we're judging something that's not even a complete project. Like, let me get to the end and then judge me if you want to judge.
So good. And it's so interesting. Many times on this show, as I hear people sharing about their stories and unpacking the timeline, I have even personally called my 29 to 33, which is the Jesus years, right? Those years being instrumental and foundational to not only my faith, but really getting my life in the rhythm that I really believe God wanted me to go. And it was like that launch pad for where I am now. But it took effort. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It wasn't a click of a button like so many people want, just like his ministry wasn't. And there was a lot of hardship in the midst of that. And that training ground was really the premise for all of those disciples to then be able to go out and tell nations. But until those disciples went through that experience as learners of the Lord, as learners and recipients of that work that he did when he was here, it wasn't until the very end of the days that they even understood the miracles that were being taking place and the power that was being gifted to them. And so I think that it's so interesting. And knowing that the prefrontal cortex doesn't close till you're 25, that's essentially the soft spot that everybody talks about when you're a baby. And it's fundamental to the knowledge that we have so much more work to do with our children between those ages of 18 and 25. They are not ready to just go out of the nest yet. And so I love that that's been laid on your heart. It's something that I'm really passionate about too. So here you are, you're in this space, you're growing your hair out, you're getting a little shaggy on us. And what are they saying?
So it's interesting. Again, I'm one of the most recognizable individuals at the company. The first time I started growing out, an additional reason I started growing out, there was this phase that some of our youth were going through where they started coloring their hair and different things like that. And I wanted them to see a picture of success that looks similar to them.
Ooh, I
You know,
love
we paint
that.
this picture of success with nice hair and a suit and tie and all of that. And it's a lie. It's not the truth. We're doing it for other people. So I just wanted them to see a different model of success. So I'm doing all of this. We go to a national sales meeting. Mind you, at these national sales meetings, listen, by the grace of God, I'm never alone. Like I always have people that I have to engage with, catch up with, the whole nine. I give out tons and tons of love, so I get it back in spades. We go to this national sales meeting. I'm literally sitting on a row by myself. Nobody sits by me, which is unheard
Oh
of.
my gosh.
Mind you, I'm supporting sales for the US and Canada. I've probably onboarded 200 plus people, but they're like, I don't know what's going on with him. Who is he?
He's the
What
bad
is he
kid
going through?
in the back row.
Yeah. And I was like in the middle of the row. I wasn't even in the back row. Like I was in the middle, which made it even crazier because this whole row was empty. And so there's this thing called a lock journey. When you grow in locks, there's the journey that you have to grow through. And like a lot of that happens. Like people don't see it, but you recognize how people treat you different, how they look at you different, all of that. Now, eventually they came around once they realized, I was who I was. But I will say this, the CEO of the company at that time, we were in New York and I was at one of these trainings. He came by and listen, my hair was in bad shape. If you know the process of going
Yeah,
from,
yeah.
yeah. And so it was, the top was blonde, the roots were black. They hadn't quite locked. Uh, and he was like, cool hair. And I think that gave everybody else permission to be cool with me. But it's just it's so ridiculous how people would treat you
It really
based
is.
on aesthetics and all of
Yep.
that.
Yep. And also too from interior, like even from sin, right? Like they compare sin so much about like, oh, that's your vice. Oh, that's what your trauma was. Oh, that's what, and like they put people on this hierarchical scale. And it always just brings me back to that moment when Jesus just drew the line in the sand and he said, anybody who can cast the first stone. Right. And so it's the same thing. And it might seem silly to connect outward appearance to sin, but it's very similar in the way that it's treated. I mean, my son, who's 9, has really long hair, and it was such a journey for him in that phase. And he got called a girl all the time, and he would run off the playground over to me when he was smaller. And they're calling me a girl, and I told him I'm a boy 5 times. And I'm like, you want mama to get involved? And I'm like, just tell him you have a penis. It'll be fine. Like, it's the only thing. And so meanwhile, he's like, I don't understand why people are so mean. And I'm like, it's just there's preconceived and conceptions of what's right and what's wrong and what's healthy and what's not and what's successful and what's not. And I stopped wearing what everyone expected me to wear in business settings and anything, because I'm like, I don't need to wear, nobody's dictating my wardrobe. And so I don't need to wear a suit when I go to this business formal meeting with these people. I don't care if I'm the only female in the room and I choose not to wear that. Like, I want to show up in me. So I'm in my sparkles and my glitz and my glam, and it's fun. And I think it's so critical for people to realize like that whole simple concept. Don't judge a book by its cover. It's the same thing when it comes to sin connected to anything about our identity.